what's going on, everybody? It's your guy Realistic here, and I'm doing another tutorial for soundoracle.net. And in this video, I'm going to be going over how limiters work. But first, before we get into that, if you're not already, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you can catch the latest content that we drop weekly. And also, Oracle and I released an online mixing course called The Art of Beat Mixing. It's filled with hours worth of content. We got PDF mixing guides in there as well. Every process, every technique that you're going to need to know to make your beat mixes sound better. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into our tutorial today and talk about limiters. Now, what is a limiter? A limiter is basically going to be something that allows you to put on your mix that you can set a ceiling or a maximum output. And what it's going to do is it's going to allow you to increase the gain of the incoming signal, but it's not going to exceed where that limit is or that ceiling is that you put. Now, what's the difference between that and a compressor? Well, a compressor is going to have a threshold, and it usually has a little bit of a give when it hits that threshold, right? So as the single's hitting that threshold, there'll be sometimes a little bit of a give. Whereas a limiter, you're going to set this threshold or the ceiling here, and when the signal hits it, there's not going to be any give. It's just going to be this brick wall, right? So with a compressor, it's going to give a little give, a little movement, but with the actual limiter here, you're going to hit that and there's not going to be any give. So it just kind of sets that ceiling, that brick wall that you can't go past. So with that being said, let's dive into our actual parameters here. And I got two things opened up here. I got Pro L2 and I got the Ableton stock limiter. That way you can kind of see the difference between some of the naming, but they're actually the same functions. And so let's dive into the first one right here that has different names between these two. On Pro L2, it's called output, but on most limiters, it's actually going to be called the ceiling here, right? And so what that's going to do is it's going to set the maximum possible output. So again, with that limit right there, we can't go past whatever we're going to set this at right here. Now for me, I usually set this to -1. Right? Some people might set it to -2. Some people set it to 0.5. It's really, whatever your preference is, wherever your ears think that that's going to give you the best results. I've had a lot of really good luck setting mine to -1. But anyways, now that we have this set right here, this is going to be our ceiling and nothing's going to go past this limit right here. So it's kind of really a safety net. So if you have it at 0, you could run the risk of clipping or causing some output issues. So this again just gives you a little safety net there. All right, so now let's move on to gain, because these two are really linked together right here. And this lets you add gain to the incoming signal, not the outgoing signal. So the signal that the source that's being put through this limiter, you're able to increase that. And so this is really tied into the output though, because the lower that your ceiling is, the more risk that you're going to run into distortion and over compression, the more you increase that gain. So you got to be careful with this one right here. You usually, it all depends on, as far as what the numbers are, it all depends on how loud the track is that you're mastering, where that level is at, and then also how loud that you're going to go for it. I usually try to aim for mine to be around +8 to +10, somewhere around there, and then I'll adjust levels within the actual mixed track, or I might use a limiter or a maximizer right before that to kind of help a little bit. But as far as numbers go, that's the number that I'm aiming for there. So now let's go ahead and talk about this release parameter right here. And this sets how fast it takes for the limiting to stop after the signal drops below the ceiling. So we got our ceiling, and if we have a faster release, then it's going to drop down a lot faster. But if we have a slower release, then it's just going to take more of a gradual pace to get down there. And most of the time, shorter release times are going to be punchier and louder, whereas longer release times are going to be cleaner and give you a little bit more of a transparent result. I try to be a little bit more in the middle here, but again, it's really going to be dependent on different tracks, and so it's not going to be the same every time, but I try to stay between this area right here in the middle of the clock here. and then just kind of use my ears there. All right, so now let's talk about the next parameter here, attack. And I wanted to talk about release first and then attack last, because attack is not on every single limiter. In fact, you're going to run into more limiters that don't have an attack time than limiters that do. You can see that this limiter right here by Ableton doesn't have it. The Ozone one doesn't have it. I don't think that the Waves one has it either, at least not the L2 one. But anyways, what the attack is, it's not like the attack on a compressor. This is going to be more connected to the behavior of the release parameter, and this sets how quickly the release will set in. This is really going to affect the transients. The more that you have this faster, you're going to run the risk of squashing that. Now, with faster attack times, the release will build up quickly, and then with the slower attack times, the release will have more of a slower buildup. And so I definitely stress that you use the attack time with caution. I usually stay within somewhere in this ballpark, and then just, again, use my ears for that. So let's dive into the look ahead parameter here. This sets how quickly the limiter will react to sudden peaks. I do recommend using this parameter right here, but it does come at the cost of using up more of your CPU when you do that, so just be careful with that. So shorter look ahead times can give you more compression and more loudness, but you're going to be doing this at the cost of adding more distortion. So when you have a longer look ahead time, you're going to allow the Pro L2 to basically look into the future to see what's coming, so it can kind of prepare and make adjustments. So it will give the limiter a little bit more natural sound, a safer sound. It is going to be a little bit more hard on your CPU, but I do recommend using the look ahead parameter whenever possible. All right, now a lot of limiters, not all, but a lot of limiters are going to have an oversampling function right here, and I do recommend using this as well. So oversampling is going to reduce the amount of aliasing and interpeak sampling, right? So aliasing is basically bad sounding distortion. It's not distortion that we really want to have in our mix. And so oversampling can greatly reduce that being in our mix. And so the higher the oversampling, the greater chance that you have to minimize this. And oversampling can also help you push your limiter a little bit more, meaning that you can get more loudness out of your limiter, because we're basically reducing that aliasing and that bad distortion that we don't want in our track here. So now we're able to increase the limiter a little bit more and push a little bit out of it. Now, usually the recommendation is you want to try at least 2 to 4 times for oversampling, but if you can, try to go up to 8. I usually dance around between 8 or 16 depending on the track. You also do want to use your ears, because some tracks 8 is going to sound better than 16. Higher doesn't necessarily mean that it's always going to sound better. Sometimes 16 can be a little too clean. Sometimes it can affect the tone a little bit. So really just got to pay attention to your ears a little bit. And then also, this is really going to be CPU intensive, even as small as 2 and 4. You are going to increase your CPU load when you're using this. Back in the day, before I had this nice computer that I'm using, I used to have this off while I was mastering, and then what I would do is I would put it on right before I was about to bounce it out and kind of listen, and I never went above 8. And so if you are concerned about CPU issues, that's an approach that I recommend. Where I'm at now, that I have a nicer computer, I'm actually able to master with the oversampling on, which is nice, so I can hear the changes and everything that I'm making. But again, if CPU is an issue, just you can save it for last and then just put it on right before you're about to bounce that out. All right, so this next thing right here, it's a true peak. I'm just gonna touch on it real quick. It ensures audio will match the output when the digital signal is converted to analog. I always just keep the true peak on this limiter here. It's a nice little safety net and it sounds good. All right, so now let's talk about Dither and what that does. And basically, what Dither is it's going to increase the overall noise floor of your audio. Now, theoretically, Dither is the best way to keep the detail and resolution of your track in place by introducing that noise floor. And oftentimes, or almost all the time, you want to save this for the absolute last thing that you do when you're mastering. So basically, right before you bounce this out, then you're going to want to go ahead and apply your dithering right there based on what your bit depth is of the source that you're going to send it to. Now, here's another thing to keep in mind is that you want to consider where this is going. If you're going to be mastering for a streaming service, I would say keep this off. Their bit depths and stuff are already set in place and they already have that stuff figured out on their end. This is going to be more if you're going to put this to a physical piece of music like a CD or a vinyl record or a tape cassette or something like that. That's usually when you'd want to apply dither. More times than not, when you're going for streaming, you can leave this off. All right, so the last thing that I want to touch on when it comes to limiters is the metering here. And these days, at least in 2020 and a few years leading up before that, the music industry has adapted the LUFS meter, which stands for loudness unit full scale. So this meter came from the broadcasting world. They use it basically to set regulations for commercials, even though a lot of times the commercials are still a lot louder than the actual show. This was meant to set it to where the commercial would not be louder than the actual show. Like here's what we recommend: put your commercial at this loudness unit right here. That way it matches the show. But whatever, brands don't ever follow that. But anyways, long story short, the music industry has now adapted that for streaming services, that they use that for their standard for measuring loudness, and for good reason. The LUFS meter does a really good job of analyzing the perceived loudness of what's actually going on in your software versus what's gonna land in our ears here. So it does a really good job at that. It also does a really good job of analyzing the overall loudness versus the short-term loudness. So again, that's why they use that. Anyways, I do want to get into a little bit here with the numbers on it, because there is some controversy that goes with the numbers behind it. If you read any online articles, they're going to tell you to master at -14 LUFS if you're going for streaming services. However, I will say that if you master at -14 LUFS and submit it to Apple Music or Spotify, your music is not going to be able to compete with the rest of the music on that platform. Now, the articles claim that the reason why it's at -14 is because they have a normalizing software that will make the songs that are too loud, it's going to bring those down. It's going to bring the songs that aren't loud enough, and it's going to pull those up. So it's going to normalize everything to where it's the same volume. But again, if you've ever submitted it at -14, you know that that's not actually the case, that what you're hearing back, it's not actually going to be as loud as the other stuff on most of the platform that you're listening on. They do claim that the users have the option to turn the normalizing off. It's inside the settings of your app. Now, for me, on Apple Music, it was already turned off, so it wasn't even on to begin with. They claim that it's set by default, but for some reason it was off when I went and checked. On Spotify, it was on, but even though it's on, when there's a song that's at -14 LUFS, it is still noticeably quieter than a song that's not. So anyways, that's my little rant on the standard that the online articles claim. I think that you'll have much better results if you shoot for -9 or -8. Keep in mind that when we're talking about loudness units, the closer to 0 we're at, the louder it is. So -8 is actually louder than -14, not the other way around. But I do recommend for -8, -9. Some songs are even louder than that. I know most of Post Malone's album and the Baby's last 2 albums have been closer to -5 or -6, which is really, really loud. But I would say that you don't necessarily have to feel the need to compete with that loud, because other songs, like most songs, are going to be closer to -8 or -9. Like Drake's song Fake Love, that's at like -8. Gunna's song with Roddy Ricch, Cooler Than a Bee, that's closer to -9 LUFS, and a lot of the music is around that realm. There are some exceptions that people are pushing it much higher than that, but when you do push for something that loud, you do have to keep in mind that you really got to make sure that your mix is really clean, really good, really accurate, and you really got that low end figured out, because otherwise if you push for something that loud, you're going to start to introduce a lot of clipping, a lot of aliasing, a lot of artifacts that you don't want if that low end isn't figured out, or if there's any type of frequency clashing. By raising the volume, we're introducing distortion. So if there are some frequency clashes within there, the closer we are to -5 or -6 LUFS, the more distortion and crackling and hissing is going to show up in your mix. So again, really make sure that you're aiming for a cleaner mix if you're trying to get it that loud. But I do think that -8 or -9 is a much safer bet, and you'll have a good opportunity to still compete with most of the music that's on the streaming platforms. So anyways, I hope this tutorial helped you out and you were able to learn a little bit more about limiters. If you found this video useful and you liked it, be sure to hit that like button. I know it's crazy, but it really does help to grow the channel a lot more. Hey, thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe to our channel right here so you can catch the latest tutorials on mixing, mastering, and production. And you can check out some of our suggested videos here, here, and here. And of course, if you're looking for premium loops and samples, you can find that at soundoracle.net. We got plenty to choose from.